Alright guys, if you haven't quite gotten a grasp on comparing fractions, decimals, and percents, I want you to go back to yesterday's video and be sure you're taking notes on that, because today we're going to use that skill in order to order our fractions, decimals, and percents. So remember, to compare fractions, decimals, and percents, we have to write them in the same format. So we're going to do that while we are ordering them as well. And remember, it's easier to do that by writing them as percents or decimals, because in order to compare fractions, they would have to have the same denominator. All the fractions would have to have the same denominator to compare them properly. Okay, I don't know if you remember that from our fractions or not. So sometimes we'll order from least to greatest. Sometimes we'll order from greatest to least. So pay attention. Remember, least is the smallest, greatest is the largest. So here is our first example. Order from least to greatest. And we have 48%. We have 9/20. We have 425 tenths, hundred thousandths. We have 44 hundredths. I'm gonna grab a sharper pencil here. So when we're changing them all to decimal, we have 2 as a decimal already, and there's a quick fourth one, right? This one should be quick and easy as well, because when we set it per 100, right, percent, we would multiply 20 by 5 to get 100. So 9 times 5 is 45. So 45 per 100 is 45 hundredths. Right, 45 hundredths, so this is tenths, hundredths, or a decimal would go here. So now we're just comparing. So our tenths place are all the same, so we have to look at the hundredths place next. We have an 8. We have a 5. We have a 2 and a 4. So when we're looking at least to greatest, we're looking at the lowest. So our second place, the lowest, would be this decimal. So I'm going to write it as the initial was written, right? Then our next would be also a decimal, right? Because 4 is smaller than 5. And then our next one, it was actually as a fraction. So I'm going to list it in fraction form, and then I am going to list my last one, which was 48%. Now if it's easier for you to list the decimals in order and then rewrite them, you could do that too. And when I say rewrite them, I mean rewrite them as they were given to you, right? That's how we will always list them. So here is number 2. If I said order from least to greatest again, and you are given 130%, 1 and, that's where I put my decimal, 75 hundredths, tenths, hundredths, 4/3, and 7/5. So if I were moving all of these to a decimal, I would just do one of these, shoink, right here. Right, so this is 1 and 3/10, 1 and 75 hundredths. So 3, this would be 1 and 1/3, which we know is 1 and 3 repeating. If you didn't know that, you could take 3 into 1 to get that. right? And see that it would be repeating over and over and over again. And 7/5, so 5 goes into 7 once, remainder 2 out of the 5. So I would have 1 and, so if I went 5 into 2, 5 goes into 24 times, so 1 and 4/10. So which is least? The 1.3 with nothing after it, or the 1.3 with infinite 3's after it? So this would be least, right? The 130%, so that would be number 1. And then the one with it repeating, so that would be number 2. So that was 4/3. Then, of course, number 3 would be this 7/5. And number 4 would be 1 and 75/100. That one was kind of way out there, wasn't it? All right. So let's practice one where we order from greatest to least, shall we? So if we are given 5/6 and 85/100,000ths and 17/20ths and 9%. Okay, so we have a decimal. If we made this a decimal, we have 0.09. If we were making this a decimal, I notice instead of dividing, we can make an equivalent fraction out of 100. If we can make it out of tenths or hundredths, we are in good shape, right? So we would multiply by 5 to get the 20 there. So I have to multiply the 17 by 5. 5 times 7 is 35. 5 times 1 is 5 plus 3 is 8. So I have 85/100ths. So I'm going to write 85, and then I have tenths, hundredths. So it has to be in the second place after the decimal. And then this one isn't a nice one to go into out of 100 or 10, so I would be dividing. So 6 into 5 doesn't go into 5, but it does go into 58 times, which is 48. And this would be 3. And then this would be 3. So that would be that decimal, this decimal, this decimal. Okay, so the biggest number has to be this one right here, right? Because there's a 5 right after the 8. Because we were comparing these two. These two have a 0 in the 10th place. So I'm not going to write that as a decimal. I'm going to write it as it was given to us. 17/20ths would be first. Then we were just comparing it with this one, so that was the 5/6. And then when we compared these two, when we're looking at the hundredths place, the 9 is bigger than the 8. So we have this 9%. And finally, our only one that started as a decimal, 85 tenths, hundredths, thousandths. 85 thousandths. Okay? So remember, you might have some words that you see like 5 friends participating in a community run walk. The portion that each person walked was Kara walked 2/9, Bryce walked 165 thousandths, Tyler walked 11/40ths, Julia walked 24 and 0.5%, and Sam walked 1/5 of it. So you would just be changing all of those so that you can compare the distance that they each walked, right? Remember, we want to change them to decimals or percents, whatever you find easier, because when we compare fractions, we would have to make sure they were all in the same denominator. All right, to compare them properly. Have a fantastic, gosh, is it Wednesday already? Have a great day.